So recently, for Flames of War, the Pacific theater rules came out relatively recently. Um, they technically take place in mid-war, but there are some special rules considerations for playing battles in the Philippines with the Americans and also Malaya with the British. And so I decided to do a battle where Japanese versus USA, and this battle is meant to represent the Philippine theater. Basically, after MacArthur decided that he was going to fight on the beach and moved all of his logistics from Corregidor to Manila, he changed his mind again and decided to actually fight in the cities, essentially. And to enable that, there was a couple delaying actions fought by members of the California National Guard and also the National Guards of various Midwestern states to allow for consolidation in the northern Philippines. Ultimately, while these delaying actions did allow for a large part of the army to not get overrun, essentially, as the Japanese landed, it did ultimately lead to Bataan being surrounded, which, of course, led to the Bataan Death March. Now, in our battle today, kind of the complete opposite happened. I played the Japanese and got completely destroyed. This is the first time I played with the army list. Like I said, they're new. And you may notice that the models are not Japanese. They're Soviets, T-34s and whatnot. And I got a couple Valentines in there. And those are just proxied because I'm usually a Russian player in Flames of War. Also, this battle will take place in December, which is so the rice paddies that you see are they're dry, so it's not difficult terrain. They don't provide cover. So first of all, for the battle, we have the army lists. For the Japanese, like I said, this is the first time I've played with them, so I wasn't completely sure where I was going to go with this. One of the biggest mistakes I ended up making in this battle is I essentially fought it as if I was playing late war Russians, like an armored force that I usually do, but as the Japanese, which was not wise. So for my formation, I took the Type 97 Chiha Tank Company with a total of 12 tanks. And in support, I took some artillery, an observer, anti-air gun, which is basically their only AT option for the Japanese, dedicated AT, and infantry platoon. So one of the big mistakes I made here right off the bat is that the Chiha Tank Company gets night attack, which allows it to essentially start the battle at night, which has special rules, specifically around visibility. But any unit that's not in that formation does not get access to the night attack rules and cannot leave the deployment zone. And because we're playing delay, or I think it's called fighting retreat, fighting withdrawal, that mission type, my deployment zone as the attacker is very small. It's 8 inches. So, a good half of my army was basically stuck there. What I could have done instead was take two formations, this tank formation and perhaps an infantry formation that also has night attack, and then they all could have attacked at once. And you'll immediately see when I show you some pictures why this crippled me from the very beginning. But you got to do stuff like this if you're going to learn how the armies work. Also, some details on my background with the game. I've been playing Flames of War for about 10 years. The first version I played was 3rd edition. Do not take that as me being actually very good at the game. We could say it's like a puddle. It's very shallow. It's a large puddle, very shallow. Every couple of years I'll play a game or two. There's a period of maybe 2 years where I was playing more regularly under 4th edition around 2022, 2023. But so ultimately, even though haven't been playing for a long time and do have some experience with the game, I would say that I'm only maybe like one step above like the absolute lowest tier, like just playing the game for the first time. And like I said, most of my experience comes from playing late war Soviets. So I also took banners, which essentially allows my infantry to take more hits on defensive fire without breaking off, without being pinned down, which would have been useful if I had ever got my infantry into the assault range. And that just goes to speak how the night attack rules can help you if you utilize them correctly, because it allows you to essentially cross, sometimes half the board more before any of your troops are spotted. And then all you have to do is make that final charge. So my opponent played Americans, of course, and pretty standard loadout here. We got quite a few Stuarts. We've got 10 Stuarts. What's funny about this battle is one of the only battles I've seen where the Stuarts actually are actually like really good. And it just goes to show how poor the Japanese tanks are. Although there was an option I could have taken on the tanks, and I'll explain that later. And then just a standard rifle company, bazooka each. This is pretty anachronistic, them having the bazookas, but it's like I said, for the army lists, it's an option. We have three 81 millimeter mortars. The other thing is that technically at this time, the American infantry platoon would have also had 60 millimeter mortars, 60 or 61, I think, something like that. The game does not represent that. They only give you the 80s. Not exactly sure why. The other thing that'll become relevant is anachronistically in Flames of War, mortars can shoot in forests. They can shoot in rough terrain. In real life, you can understand why that doesn't really make sense. We also have an anti-tank platoon. 37 millimeter doesn't sound like much, but in a theater like this with the Japanese tanks, it's more than enough. And we have machine guns. And then also we have this command card that came with the new Pacific War Theater that is basically represents the U.S. only having Springfield rifles rather than Garand's. This ultimately is not really going to be that relevant in the battle, just because the primary purpose of infantry in Flames of War is just to basically exist, just to sit somewhere and be annoying. So first we have American deployment and the objectives. You can see that I split the objectives because I was hoping for a split in the army. Essentially, American player has two choices here. Either split the army, like my opponent did, or keep it all in the middle and then flex to wherever the enemy's going to attack. Because in almost all cases, you have to attack from one direction, just because you want to concentrate force. So for the deployment here, you can see we have one infantry platoon behind cover here to prevent an advance. We have one over here. One of the other objective. AT guns are near the far objective in the rough terrain. Machine guns are in the center ready to move. He kept a one Stuart platoon in reserve. And we have the mortars in the trees, which is why I mentioned that. I placed a ranged-in marker on the rough terrain before he deployed. I presumed there would be something there, which is why he pushed his mortars back. And then I put another ranged-in on the rice paddies because I knew he was going to put his infantry in front near the objective. I should have known he was going to put it here. As for my deployment, I'm in the back left corner. I make a pretty rookie mistake here, which is that despite having an observer, I put my artillery with near my infantry. The reason you don't want to do that is because they're almost certainly the indirect fire on both sides is almost certainly going to fire at each other for counter battery, and you don't want the template to cover more than it has to. Because I had an observer, there was really no reason for me to put my artillery where I did. I really could have put it on any side of the board, and because of its range, it would have hit anything anyway. And then obviously I just have my tanks in a big mob because the plan here, as you can see, is really simple. It's just to roll down the side of the board, run over his infantry, and then hopefully take the objective. Now, there's a couple presumptions I make here which are not true, which is, first of all, that my tanks are heavier than his because the Type 97 is classified as a medium tank for the Japanese, and obviously the Stuarts are light. We're going to find out here that that's not true at all. The other presumption I make here is that I will be able to destroy a critical mass of his Stuarts before I do the assault, so I don't take overwhelming defensive fire. So moving on to the first turn, as I said, this is a night attack, so only my tanks can move. You have to roll for line of sight for everything, unless you shoot. If you shoot, then you're automatically visible. So on my first turn, I tried to range in on his infantry near the objective. My observer, despite being veteran, 3 up, failed the range in on all 3 tries. So I was not able to suppress the infantry or even prevent the movement of his AT guns or machine guns. And essentially all I did was move my tanks up 12 inches, terrain dash. So on USA turn 1, he blitzes AT guns using a movement order and moves them towards where I'm obviously attacking. He has a cross check that he succeeds to move out of the rough terrain. He does not pop his ambush yet. He manages to range his mortars in on my artillery on the second try. He gets quite a few hits, but all of the saves pass. The problem, of course, is that my infantry and artillery are pinned. Now, the infantry being pinned is not too big of a deal because they can't move out of deployment anyway because of the night fighting rules. But the artillery being pinned means that if they don't succeed, they won't be able to fire next turn. So on the beginning of my second turn, he withdraws a unit because we're fighting withdraw, which he withdraws one of his 2 mortars, his 81 millimeter mortar team. I finally range in on the infantry. I managed to get quite a few hits, including on his bazooka, but he uses a command order mistaken target to move it off. Otherwise, it would have killed it, which would have been very helpful. I just moved my tanks up another 12 inches, essentially. At this point, I'm trying to get into position for an assault next turn. Now, Flames of War, the 4th edition, has a rule where you can't assault something that you did not shoot that turn, essentially meaning that your tanks cannot shoot the Stuarts and then assault the infantry, which is going to be a problem here. So for the USA second turn, he digs in his machine guns and artillery now that they've reached the leftward point. He pops his Stuart ambush, so he has all 10 of his Stuarts facing my 12 tanks. And his mortars managed to kill one of my artillery, meaning it is now in bad spirits. And I still can't move my infantry because they failed to become unpinned, and because it's still technically nighttime rules. So one of the Stuart platoons actually can't see my tanks because of the night fighting rules. So his vision is too low. But the one unit of Stuarts that can see manages to get only 2 bales on my bailouts on my Japanese tanks. Now the Japanese tanks have a special rule where they can continue to shoot their machine guns and assault on bailout. Unfortunately, at the beginning of my third turn, my artillery flees. He fails his last stand check, despite the Japanese getting better last stand check. Shameful display. My tanks, my 2 tanks that bailed fail to remount, and the machine guns fail to hit anything. They shoot them anyway. I assault with one of my platoons. It receives defensive fire from all of his Stuarts. This is sort of the mistake I was talking about, is I had to basically choose at this point, am I going to assault or am I going to shoot his Stuarts? I really should have just shot his Stuarts, because obviously I can't shoot his Stuarts and assault the infantry. Now, what we're going to find out here is that even if I had shot the Stuarts, my chances were very low of destroying them, because I overestimated the capabilities of the Japanese armor. My HQ tries to cross over the hedges to at least make its assault, because it would suffer less defensive fire, but it fails to cross-check. Probably for the best. I think it would have died anyway. So for the USA's third turn, they remove another unit. They remove the machine guns, which makes sense because if they can destroy my tanks and keep enough of their Stuarts, they can just machine gun my infantry if it tries to cross the field, essentially. I get tons of bales. Essentially, all my tanks get bailed, but the Stuart's firepower check fails pretty much every single firepower check. So even though all my tanks are bailed, they are still in the fight. The USA actually considered an assault on using the infantry to assault all my bailed tanks, because bailed tanks can be destroyed by infantry, but chooses not to because of the special rule where the Japanese tanks can continue to fight in assaults and use their machine guns, which they would have used defensive fire. At the beginning of the Japanese fourth turn, all my tanks remount except the formation commander, which is funny. My tanks, this time, I try to make up for the mistake I made last turn. My tanks fire a full salvo and get 6 hits. But unfortunately, and this is, I found this out too, I should have known this before, but I kind of was putting the formation together quickly. My guns actually only have AT5, and the Stuart's front armor is 3, meaning that essentially he has to roll a 1 for me to get a guaranteed penetration and a 2 for me to even have a chance. And it's really interesting because you can actually upgrade these Japanese tanks, to get them to AT8, which is still not good at all, but is better. It's at least competitive with the Stuart. Unfortunately, it is 2 more points, I think, per tank, which is pretty significant. But if I had done that, I think it would have made a big difference here. So everything bounces, even though I get 6 hits all of them bounce, not even a partial penetration. Also on this turn, dawn breaks, so the night fighting is over. I can finally move my infantry. So I use follow me on my AT gun teams to start getting them into position now that they can move. At the beginning of USA's turn 4, he ranges in on my infantry and kills one of the AT guns and one of my mortars. All my tanks are killed, which is my only formation, which means game over. So obviously very one-sided, but maybe it should be for Memorial Day. We get a U.S. victory. Maybe we prevented the battle, the Bataan Death March here. But so the lessons I learned from this battle is, first of all, don't play like the late war Soviets as early war Japanese. I know that seems obvious in hindsight, but playing a new army, I didn't really, You get used to playing a certain way when it works. And I've won battles like as the late Soviets doing a strategy very similar to this, where you just get your tanks in a ball and you pick a point and you break it, and you just can't do that with everybody. The other lesson I mentioned before, I have to take two formations with the Japanese. If you're going to play the Japanese, you got to fight like the Japanese. And one of the greatest strengths that the Japanese have in this rule set is the ability to get your entire army to do night fighting. If you take the right formations. And if I had done that with an infantry formation and a tank formation, it wouldn't have just been my tanks up there by turn 2. It would have also probably been at least one infantry platoon. And they could have been the ones to assault the infantry while my tanks shot the Stuarts. And that would have made all the difference. I had to take the upgraded tanks. I really needed to look at the unit cards and just do some math before the match. Because having 3 armor, Stuarts have AT7. And I have 3 armor, which means I have to roll a 4 to get a partial and a 5 or 6 to bounce. When my guns are only AT5 and he has front armor 3, the math just doesn't add up. You're not going to win that 9 times out of 10. One thing that I do think is interesting is that there was still an inflection, despite how many mistakes I made in the formation construction and in the initial moves of the game, there was still an inflection point in this game, I think, after all my tanks were bailed and I remounted them all, and I got a full salvo off. If I had managed to kill about half of his Stuarts in that turn, there was still a very good chance of victory for me. Now, of course, that was made very unlikely by my decision not to upgrade the guns, but the point I'm trying to make is that in Flames of War, sometimes it feels like the battle is over the minute deployment's decided sometimes, right? But it isn't really the case. You can have one bad turn can really flip the entire battle. Or one good turn in this case, as my hypothetical. Obviously, like I said, rookie move, putting my artillery near my infantry when I had an observer, shouldn't have done that. That way, he has to choose between suppressing my infantry to prevent them from moving forward or counter battery, essentially. And just lastly, just surprising, the Stuarts, I've played quite a few mid-war, even early war battles, especially North Africa is a theater I play a lot. Not with my army, I have Russians, but just with other people's. And the Stuarts usually just kind of get mulched, even in North Africa. But this is a battle where they really did a great job. So I'll probably be playing these Flames of War battles, not this coming Sunday or the one after, but regularly from Sunday on. So I'll do a couple more of these battle reports. And hopefully there might be some improvement in the future. Maybe I'll do a Russian one so I can show you guys how I usually play. Not to say that you'll have your socks blown off or anything, but the performance will certainly be better than here. But happy Memorial Day.